Hatchet House stands alone by a lake, as it has done for 200 years. The 2-story Gothic Revival home was once the most beautiful building in the valley, but not anymore. Now it rots, abandoned and hollow and falling apart, battered by storms, its orchard plagued by disease. It looks more like a rotting carcass than a house. But one part of Hatchet House never rots. It holds firm, immovable, and unfuckwithable. The front door. While everything else crumbles and caves in, the heavy wooden front door stands tall, held shut by iron locks, and by the woman who lives there. Her name is Helly Hackett. She only opens her front door one night every year, on Halloween. Carrie squinted at Hatchet House through the bone-white curls of her smoke. Even from where Carrie was, in a puny wooden skiff, rowed by a puny wooden dude, halfway across the lake, the old house gave her chills right up the back of her skull, like cold fingers creeping through her hair. It was a bad feeling, and she loved it. "Are you sure you want to go in there?" Jack lifted his oars, letting the skiff drift for a minute. "Hell yes," Carrie said. "You watch. I'm going to kick down that front door and go right up into that fucking turret." "But why?" he asked. "Because it's Halloween, Jacko," she said, like it justified everything. Jack's chin sank into the fat padding of his life jacket, like a nervous turtle. He regarded Carrie with the same disquiet as he did the old house. Carrie Kellogg, with her candy orange hair and pumpkin orange sweater and her cut glass grin. Her skin was so white it glowed in the dark. And it was getting very dark. Something thudded against the bottom of the boat. Jack froze. Carrie didn't. She shoved her sleeve up and plunged her arm deep into the black water. Horrified, Jack fully expected her to pull up a mangled arm stump, spurting blood like a busted hose. Instead, she pulled up an apple. The skiff had drifted into a strange mass of rotten fruit floating on the water's surface. Thousands of red and black apples bobbed on the ripples and thudded against the hull, like a swarm of little burn-victim bald heads, nodding and clonking together. "They're from the orchard," Carrie said. 200 years back, the Hackett family got rich growing apples. They fall off the trees and roll into the lake. Jack shined his cell phone flashlight along the vast orchard of tangled trees behind the house. It went as far as he could see. No wonder it was so quiet here. This must be the only house for hours. He moved the light back to Hatchet House, accidentally filling it with twitchy shadows. He regretted everything about that and flicked the light off, returning the valley to darkness. "What's the name of the ghost you're hoping to find?" Jack said. "Helly Hackett is not just a ghost, Jacko. She's a Halloween legend." Carrie grinned at him. "She's one of the chosen by the Halloween spirit. Helly enforces the rules." "Halloween has rules," Jack said. Carrie nodded and held up 4 fingers. 1. Light a jack-o'-lantern. 2. Give out candy. 3. Wear a costume. 4. Respect the dead. Helly Hackett was chosen to enforce the 3rd rule of Halloween. With violence. On October 31st, 1824, Hackett House was beautiful and brimming with people preparing for the grand wedding of the lady of the house. Fall flowers and cinnamon ribbons fluttered throughout the garden. Candied apples lined the tables. Cider filled the air with sugar and spice. The bride sat alone inside the turret of Hatchet House in her wedding dress. She was shy and too quiet for parties. Instead, she hummed softly and sewed the last details on her veil. It was no ordinary veil. For Helly Hackett would be no ordinary wife. How could she ever be? After all, she was a daughter of Halloween. That's what her mother had called her, ever since the day she was born on October 31st. Her mother had come from the old country and raised Helly to respect the old ways, to observe Samhain and respect its traditions. Her mother was dead now, and Helly had been raised, well, to respect the dead, be proud of the old ways, and respect their rules. At any cost. Almost finished, Helly said to the tiny ginger coat mouse that sat on her sewing basket. His teeny eyes glittered at her like blackberry beads as he nibbled a pumpkin cookie. He was her only friend in the world, this little turret mouse. She called him Sam. She had sewn a special pocket in her wedding dress skirt just for Sam to sit in and join her wedding day. She didn't really want to marry anyone. It was the Hackett fortune this man was marrying. But it would be all right. She had Sam to keep her company. She snapped the final thread, pleased with her work. White lace woven into a spiderweb pattern draped off the brim of the elegant hat. The top of the hat was cone-shaped and tall, covered in white spiders. She had needle felted herself. A white witch hat covered in white spiders to match her wedding dress. A Halloween costume suitable for a wedding and fit for a daughter of Halloween. She pinned the hat on her head and looked in the mirror. Her mother would be proud. Helly gently picked up Sam and tucked him in the pocket in her skirt. His pink toes and black eyes peeped over the pocket's hem. Helly lit a candle inside the jack-o'-lantern she had carved with hearts for eyes and placed it in the turret window to watch over her wedding. "Here we go, Sam," Helly said. She pulled the spiderweb veil over her face. She was ready. But the wedding did not go as planned. It wasn't Helly's fault. It was his. He refused to let her wear her Halloween hat to her own wedding. He yelled at her to take it off. Because he would be the husband and he would take over this house, and he ripped the hat off her head and threw it on the kitchen floor to prove it. "To hell with Halloween," he said. "What do you think about that?" Helly knew he expected her to fling herself at him and cry and beg his forgiveness. But Helly did no such thing. She remained calm and quiet, which seemed to make him angrier, and he kicked and punched pots and pans off the wall onto the floor. Startled by the racket, little Sam jumped from Helly's skirt pocket and skittered terrified across the floor, scrambling for somewhere to hide. But that man raised his shoe and slammed it down on Sam. Right before Helly's eyes, the little mouse squealed and flailed in agony. Then he was quiet. Helly's eyes flashed with static. No one knows what happened inside Helly's mind at that moment. Anyone else would have screamed their throat out and wept a lake of tears. Not Helly. She just stood there, immovable and unfuckwithable, like a locked door holding back secrets and thoughts darker than anyone could ever imagine. Helly Hackett walked down the aisle alone, or rather, almost alone, for she had gathered the tiny dead body of her sweet ginger coat mouse from the kitchen floor and tucked it inside the pocket of her wedding dress and put a sugared blackberry in with him for a treat. It was an outdoor wedding, so the aisle was a path through the heart of the orchard. As she walked, apples fell around her. They tumbled from the branches and battered the earth like raindrops. Helly walked with patience and calm and no smile. She carried black and red roses and no veil. The wedding guests' eyes narrowed at her bare head, but Helly ignored them. She walked closer and closer to the priest and to him, who stood there with Sam's blood still on his shoe. The closer she got, the more the whites of her eyes crackled and sparked. If anyone thought it was rage in her eyes, they were wrong. It was much worse. Helly arrived at the front of the wedding. The music faded. The guests sat down. The priest inhaled to speak. "Dearly beloved," he said, but that's as far as he got. Because Helly dropped her flowers and reached up under her skirt and pulled out 2 hatchets, one in each hand, hers and his. "In my house, we respect the traditions of Halloween," Helly growled into the terrified face of the man she would never marry. "What do you think about that?" With a single magnificent swing, Helly hacked off his head. It flew into the crowd of screaming guests and splattered their open mouths and fine clothes with blood. Helly threw down the hatchet she brought for him and held up the other one she brought for herself. Before anyone could stop her, Helly raised the hatchet and turned the hatchet blade towards herself. She held it with both hands, and with all her strength, she hacked herself with the hatchet right in her own face. Helly survived. Of course she survived. But her face was no longer human. It was no longer a face. For she had hacked herself into a permanent monster. Her birthday gift to herself was the most grisly and monstrous Halloween mask ever made, because it could never come off. That was her plan. No matter what happened now, no matter what anyone said to her, Helly Hackett would never have to go without a Halloween costume ever again. The Halloween spirit chose Helly Hackett, daughter of Halloween, to be a guardian of Halloween that very day. The spark of darkness that lit inside her broken heart fanned into a black fire that gave off no light, but let her slip through the veil between the living and the dead, one night every year. For Helly had been raised well to honor the traditions of Halloween, to respect the old ways and follow their rules. At any cost. The judge said Helly Hackett was insane and they locked her inside that turret for the rest of her life, Carrie said. She only came down on Halloween, wearing her wedding dress, with her dead mouse in the pocket and her fucked up Halloween horror face. And anyone not wearing a Halloween costume. Hatchet? Jack guessed. Hatchet, Carrie said. That's why they call it Hatchet House. And you want to be the first person to get her ghost on camera, Jack said. You got it, Jacko. And by the way, I got you this, just to be safe. Carrie pulled a mask from her backpack and gave it to Jack. It was one of those thin, vacuum-formed plastic face masks with a white elastic around the back to hold it on. It was a pig face mask, pink with cutout eyes. I do like to follow rules, Jack said, as he put on the mask. How do I look? Creepy as fuck, which is perfect, Carrie said. She stubbed out her cigarette on the side of the boat and flicked it into the water, which made Jack cringe. She double-checked the charge on her camera. Jack steadied the boat as Carrie jumped out of it, landing boots first in icy water up to her thighs. "You stay here and wait for me," she told Jack. "If you get scared, just blow that little plastic whistle on your life jacket and I'll come save you." Jack knew she was mocking him, but he had already thought of the whistle as a plan A if he freaked out. "And do not take that mask off," she warned him. "Hey, it's a Halloween rule," Jack said. His voice buzzed against the inside of the plastic mask. It smelled weird, but he ignored it. Through the cutout eye holes, he watched Carrie slosh a determined path through the rotten apples, straight toward Hatchet House. A thought struck him. "Carrie, wait!" he called out to her. "You're not wearing a Halloween costume." "I know," she called back, her grin cutting through the dark. "I'm the bait." Carrie hauled her soaked boots out of the lake and stood before Hatchet House. It loomed much larger than she'd expected, and even spookier than she'd hoped. The boards of the house creaked endlessly, as if they were trying to fall down. The wind-battered turret jutted into the black sky. The place where Helly Hackett lived to 100 and died in her bloody wedding dress. Carrie scanned the house and property around it for any sign of life. There was no one. It was ghost quiet. Carrie shined her flashlight back at the lake, at Jack in his pig mask, rocking gently in the skiff. She waved at Jack. He waved back. Behind her, the front door of Hatchet House opened slowly, by itself. There was no one, no wildlife, not even a bird. Carrie grinned. Her eyes lit up like sparks from a live wire. She took it as an invitation from the ghost of Helly herself and stepped through the front door and into the Hatchet House. The moon did its best to give Carrie a little light, enough to see gaping holes in the roof that let red leaves tumble in from the colossal maple hanging over everything. So a haunting, blood-red snowfall of dead leaves drifted down around her. Beyond that, everything was shadows. The crude light of her camera fell on the back wall. She saw 2 hatchets mounted there, crisscross. No way, Carrie thought, as she stumbled over broken floorboards and shattered glass to get her hands on those hatchets. On closer look, Carrie realized she'd been wrong. There was only one hatchet. The second one was missing. Only its shadow was there. Carrie felt something behind her. It felt like lace against the back of her neck. She whipped her light around, but there was no one there. Just the open front door, and beyond that, there was Jack, way out in the skiff, floating in the lake. He had taken the pig mask off. Carrie chuckled. It took him long enough. The hot pepper juice she'd smeared inside the pig mask must have finally burnt his eyeballs enough that he had to take it off. "Trick or treat, Jacko," Carrie chuckled to herself. "I always choose trick," she would explain to him later, as they laughed over drinks in some bar somewhere. But that was later. Right now, Carrie wanted that hatchet. Fuck the video, fuck the turret. The stairs were long gone anyway. But to walk out of here with Helly Hackett's very own hatchet? Now that was a serious Halloween lover's prize. Carrie pried the hatchet from its rusted mounts and looked it over. Solid, clean blade, sharp as fuck, heavy in her hands. This thing must have done serious damage that day. Thudding sounds started. like the sound from under the boat, but this time it was outside. Braver with the hatchet in hand, Carrie stepped out the front door and discovered the source of the sound. Apples falling, dropping from the trees all around the house, hitting the ground, rolling past Carrie's soaked boots toward the lake. Carrie looked up. There she was, Helly Hackett, standing alone among the trees. Trick or fucking treat, Carrie whispered to herself. The woman in white faced away from her, but it had to be Helly Hackett. She was even wearing a wedding dress soaked in blood. It sounded like she was moaning. Or was it whistling? Carrie fumbled her camera. The light broke. She turned to the lake to wave at Jack to get his attention. Jack didn't wave back. He just sat there in the boat, motionless. Why was he doing that? "That's not funny, Jacko," Carrie yelled. As if disturbed by the yelling, the skiff rocked on the water, and Jack's head leaned to the side and fell right off his shoulders, hit the edge of the boat, and tumbled into the lake. Carrie clapped her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming, just in time to hear dead leaves crunching behind her. Helly Hackett, still facing away from Carrie, was gliding backwards along the ground, through the leaves, backwards towards Carrie, faster and faster. Carrie vibrated with terror. She raised the hatchet she'd stolen from the house and noticed the blade of it. It was bloody. No, wait, it wasn't bloody when Carrie took it off the wall. It wasn't bloody when she took it from the house. Where did all the blood come from? Carrie never had a chance to figure it out, because Helly Hackett was coming fast. 20 feet away, 10 feet away, 5 feet away. Her whistling groans became skull-cracking howls as she whipped around to face Carrie. And Helly Hackett's face was no face, no eyes, just 2 festering hatchet scars, bleeding shadows and maggots. No bottom half to her skull, just a black tongue, dangling like a dead snake, and the rest of the rotting flesh infested with death-eating damselflies, orange-black veined butterflies, and screams. Carrie slashed the hatchet wildly at that nightmare face, but she was too wild. She missed. "Fuck this," she yelled, and made a run for the water. Carrie raced away from the howling ghost, but she would never make it to the water, because Carrie slipped on a rotten apple and fell, face first, on the blade of her own hatchet. Carrie survived. Of course she survived. That was the plan. The ghost of Helly Hackett hovered over the woman with the hatchet in her face. The dead mouse in Helly's pocket looked down with his little black eyes. Carrie's nose was gone. Bile and broken teeth spilled from what was left of her jaw. Then Helly Hackett took her hatchet back, her ghostly hands thinner than smoke as they wrapped around the blood-slathered hatchet handle and pulled. Carrie's facial bones cracked as the blade came out. One of her eyeballs came loose and rolled down the hill and into the lake to float off like a rotten apple. "Almost finished," Helly said to the dead mouse in her pocket. She raised the hatchet over Carrie's face and brought it down. Three days after Halloween, police found the skiff drifting in the lake, with Jack's headless body still sitting up straight with his life jacket on. They searched the remains of Hatchet House as much as they dared, since the whole thing was a crumbling death trap, and they scoured the orchard with dogs. But they never found Carrie's body, and they never found Jack's missing head. But it was only because they didn't stay to look at the house after dark. They would have noticed the glow of candlelight in the shape of two hearts, like two eyes, carved into Jack's hollowed-out head, which someone had placed inside the Hatchet House turret in the window to watch over the valley. Until next Halloween. Darkside Tales is written by Vanessa F. Penney. Produced, narrated, and edited by Roxanne Potvin.